Hello everyone, this is Bradley. So today this is a tutorial talking about the preset basics 2. And I said 2 because I already made a tutorial a long time ago talking about the preset basics. And just kind of, so the entire whole point of this series of tutorial is going to talk about some important information when you're making your own preset or you're using my preset library. Firstly, I would like to do a kind of short recap about what we have discussed last time. Last time I've discussed that in many presets of my library, I have a duplicate of nodes. And one example is the minimum maximum loop and the minimum max list. These are kind of a very standard example. And basically their function are almost 100% the same. There are little bit difference, but not very much. Actually, they're basically the same, 100% the same except for this iteration. So basically for this minimum maximum loop, it outputs only a single value all the time, and you can change by the seed, but it's just a single value. It does not change many things. You cannot change the amount of value that you output. However, for the minimum maximum list, it can output multiple values. So now it outputs 0 values, but if you change the iteration to 1, it outputs 1 value. Change the iteration to 2, it outputs 2 values. And you can change to as many as possible as you wish. So basically this is kind of idea. And the reason to have a duplicate is mainly because the difference between the group inputs and the loop input, both of them, they can actually output a subprogram. So now I have the subprogram from the group input, and I can also have the subprogram from the loop input. Both of them, they can be used for making the presets, but because we cannot change these sockets from the singular to plurals, sometimes if you design the preset to output a single value, it just has to be the output the single values. And on the other hand, use the loop input, you can surely output multiple values because we have the iteration functions. And so on and so forth. For details, you can go through the last tutorials. But basically, this is all about it. And today I'm going to talk about a feature, which is super amazing because this is also a feature that I proposed to the developer. And since the animation node has been developed from the 2.1 version to 2.2 version, this feature finally has been integrated to this entire animation node, and it becomes super amazing. And I hope you to use this feature. And this is a feature that I am using for my preset library. So sometimes you might have missing functions in my preset library if you don't know how to use this feature. This is super simple though, and I will show you just in a second. So here I'm going to show you an example from native animation nodes. If I'm taking the object mesh data node, and this is the node that we're going to have, and you probably think this node is all about it, that we have 3 input sockets and 3 output sockets. You probably think this is the function of all these nodes. However, this is actually wrong. There are 2 ways to call up the hidden socket. If you hit U, this is one shortcut. Then you will find node settings, advanced settings, socket settings. And in socket settings, you can find input and output. And you do find that there are many cases that we are hiding the socket. And this is what this node really looks like. So there are lots of hidden sockets. And you do realize, compared to the original object mesh data nodes, their sizes are totally different. And one more important thing is that there are lots of sockets that I've never used ever in my life, like the probably polygon indices, local polygon areas, material indices. I've never used all these kind of things below the polygon indices. Maybe some people will use that for some reasons, but I've never used them. Another thing is, it does not mean that they're useless simply because I don't use them, but it does not mean it's useless. Okay, it's still important to know and to have this function. Depends on how you use them or what kind of effect you would like to achieve, and so on and so forth. But it's no. But I suppose even the developer knows that it's rarely used. That's why they hide them by default. So normally you don't see all this kind of output, and you see these kind of tiny nodes. What I want to say in this case, if by any chances if you have all these sockets being shown when you each time you call this node, then it will disrupt the maintenance of your node tree very much, because you always see this large chunk of nodes while there are so many sockets that they are not in use. There are so many nodes which are just tiny, like smooth bezel spline. It's just this much size compared to the others. And in order to sometimes view the node tree much better, I have to actually zoom out a little, and I cannot read all this kind of small tiny text with my bad sight. I'm nearly blind to all these kind of lines or other things. Sometimes it's just not good to view the trees. But if I'm kind of zoom in, then I lost the view of my entire object mesh data. Where's my input? I have to scroll down, and I have to scroll up, scroll down, scroll up, back again. It's kind of just very bad when you're using that. But if you're just having this default object mesh data while you're only using this tiny small whatever stuff, and definitely it's possible that let's just do kind of one of the most stupid examples, kind of spline from points. You put a vertex in the point, spline out the spline, curve object. I don't think you're going to have this node tree, but this node tree this is one possible example. I don't know. Just take the cube and you output a target. So now we have a weird whatever stuff that you can potentially see. I don't know why you're gonna to do this, but this is just the one thing that you can potentially do. So you don't necessarily to actually, so you can zoom in your node tree and you can see the basically big picture of my node tree very well. But if you're going to take that the whole object mesh data, then you don't see a full pictures of whatever other nodes if you zoom in too much or too little. Kind of idea, just it looks nicer if it becomes cleaner when there are so many sockets which are not in use. Okay. Whether you take that or not, basically what I want to achieve in the preset library is sometimes there are so many sockets that I'm not going to use by default. So I would like to hide them, and this is it. So in the past we don't have these features, but several months ago the developer developed these features and integrated that to animation nodes. So here we're going to talk about how can we actually, oh, by the way, there is an example. It's called a random transform. This node is already very large, actually probably as large as the object mesh data node. Actually even larger than that, because there are so many vector input for reasons. And in fact, this node is much larger than it looks like. If you go to the socket settings and you do have the rotation scale, it becomes even larger. And to prevent such kind of case to happen, I hide them by default with the feature that I'm going to talk about. And this is what we're going to discuss. So let's start with making a subprogram which is dumb than ever, so that I can teach you how to hide socket by default. So let's take a loop input, and in the parameter I'm going to add a vector, just a single vector, and in the parameter I'm going to add a single ruler. You don't necessarily follow me on making this because this is completely dumb. And I'm going to output a vector list. So now we've made a subprogram, but this is just a dump. So let's hit W and go to the right. Let's evoke the subprogram. And you can see we have a very large subprogram. It's basically just useless. And you can change the iteration into output vector list. Basically the same vector list over and over again. By the way, if you ever would like to do such kind of function, there is a node which is called repeat list. So you input a list or a whatever stuff, and it will repeat as what it does. Like a single vector has been repeated so many times. so on and so forth. So next thing I would like to do is to hide the socket by default. If I hit U, and in the node setting we will have these parameter sockets and other things, and you do see there is an option of hide. So you just take this hide. For example, let's take this ruler to hide that, and it's done. It's all that simple. So you just hit W, and it goes to right, invoke the subprogram. You can see now we have a subprogram which is called by default, but it does not have a ruler because we hide that earlier. We can name this subprogram as dumb example. So you can hit Shift A and we can see the dumb example. So basically call the same thing. Yes. What I didn't say earlier is that except for just calling U, because I don't actually like this interface. Sometimes simply because U is probably, I don't know, probably easy to access, so I usually hit U, but you do also realize that sometimes having this U is making the things much more chaotic because the interface is just bad. So there's another way, just hit N. It's basically call up the same things and you do the same things. But I feel like the N panel is sometimes looks better than U. I don't know exactly why, but it's just kind of phenomenon. And you can scroll, by the way. You can scroll, but the U you cannot scroll. You can just move that, and you have to, yeah, whatever. Yes, so basically this is kind of idea. Another thing, this is something I've discussed in the past. If you try to change these values here, whether you're using U or N, it does not really matter. It will change the default value as well. So let's evoke the subprogram again. You can see the default value has been changed. Another thing I would like to discuss is many times the output wants to be hidden as well, because I can have billions of outputs. And it's also the same that you can hide by default. And if you would like to change the name of the output, for example, dumb example output, and you try to evoke the subprogram, we just hide this output. So let's just hit U, go to socket settings, and activate its presence. So now we have dumb example output. And you can definitely change that to other cases like just example. So now we have this. This is that simple. One more thing I would like to remind you is when you're in such kind of interface, if you go to the node tree, actually it goes to, where is that? Goes to node. You do realize there's a kind of screen socket that seems like that we can hide, or because this is basically the kind of icon that we can hide or do whatever kind of socket, right? We can hide or activate or show the socket, whatever stuff. And this is a kind of very misleading thing, because what it does is it's hiding the socket, but it does not hide by default. So you still have to hide by default using all these hide functions. Another important thing is if you already have a linkage, then you cannot hide this. So remember to use these advanced node settings instead of using the node settings. And this is basically equally true to the advanced node settings. Equally true to the output. And basically, if you're trying to work with the group inputs, it's basically the same if you try to use a vector. You also have the hide options. And if you try to output the vector, you can also hide that. And this is all about it. Actually, I hope this tutorial is simple and straightforward enough to you. Just for you to realize, if you're using my preset library, there are many sockets which has been hidden or shown. Let's try to give you an example if my memory is correct. There's a node which is called instancing on Sublime. Yes. This node, it looks like it only have 2 output sockets, but for the matrices, and if you sometimes would like to have vectors, for example, if you try to use the object transform output, and you have to put the uniform into location, and you have to use a bridge to convert the you have to decompose matrix for the matrix into the location, rotation, and scales. You have to do such kind of things. One more steps. However, what actually happens if you go to the socket settings, you will find there is vector output being hidden. Sometimes I think matrix output is much more superior than the vector input, because it does not only include the location information but also the rotation and scales information. It's a very nice thing, and you can definitely use the object matrix output. But what if I only need the location for whatever kind of reason? Then I need to use the vector, and instead of just use an extra node to decompose the matrix, I can directly output the vector. And since I don't use these sockets very frequently, I just hide them by default each time I call up this node. And there are also many other nodes that has hidden input or hidden outputs that you may or may not need to know or control unless it's a very specific, very rare case. So just kind of be aware. There are so many nodes, so many things that sometimes I don't even remember that even if I have a node. Oh, there is also a node which is called instancing object. This node has been changed largely. So I made a tutorial in the past about this node. And if you look at that tutorial about how I built this node, you will realize this node, what it looks like right now, is completely different from what it looked like in the past from my tutorial, because I updated this so much. And there's so many settings. Let's just go to socket setting, and you can see there's so many different sockets that was hidden by defaults, and you probably have no idea about them. Actually, I don't expect you have an idea about them. It's just you don't necessarily take care of that. But this is just one of the reasons that why I hide these sockets by default, because you probably are not going to use them, but I need to use them in a very kind of specific case. So this is all about it. Anyway, just kind of keep in mind as you're using. I hope this is not too much for you, because even in native animation nodes, we have hidden sockets by default, just like this object mesh diagram. So this is all about it. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I'll probably see you next time.